Live and it's recording. Okay, excellent. All right, well, welcome everyone.
Ryan, give it 30 seconds for everybody to join.
Okay.
Because people are starting to join slowly.
Sounds good.
Thank you, sorry.
Yeah. No, you tell me when to go. Again. Okay, we are. All right. Okay, well, welcome everyone to one element of our virtual speaker series. And this is a panel discussion on ESG, environment, social, and governance, a very topical conversation that we'll be having in our industry. And so before I hand it over, I also would like to thank our gold sponsors, who are Cypher Environmental, Export Development Canada, and Business France. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our moderator, Andrew Swart from Deloitte. Andrew is the global and Canadian leader of mining and metals practice, as well as the global consulting leader for the sector. In his global roles, Andrew leads the team from around the world and has a responsibility to set strategic direction and go-to-market strategy for the global practice. He has over 20 years experience in the industry and has been all over the world. So before I hand over the mic, I'd just like to tell the audience, as we're listening to our panelists, if you have questions, which we'll address at the end, if you could use the question and answer function at the bottom of your screen to place your questions, and then we'll address them near the end of the conversation. So again, without further ado, it's my pleasure to welcome Andrew Swart as our moderator. Andrew?
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ryan, and thank you for everybody joining this particular webcast. So we have a fantastic panel today, actually representing a very broad cross-section of the industry. We're joined by Gwennael Guillen from Teranga Gold, who's the Vice President of Sustainability. We also have Mark Dawe, who's the Managing Director and Country Manager for B2 Gold in Namibia. And so those are our two mining companies. We also have Todd Burns, who's the President of Cypher Environmental, who is sort of representing the supplier side of our industry, and Andrea Mandel-Campbell, who's Senior Vice President and Practice Lead for National Capital Markets, who will bring an investor lens to this particular discussion. So really looking forward to the discussion. Before I dive into the actual questions, I actually want to give each of you a chance to maybe talk a little bit more about, I guess, your organizations, and in particular, some of the ESG initiatives that you've got underway within your company. So let me first turn over to you, Gwennael, and for you to talk a little bit about Teranga.
Thanks, Andrew. Yes, so just to let you know as an introduction that I began my career as an environmental consultant in a French consulting firm, so far away from the mining world. And in 2007, through a family project, we moved to French Guiana, South America. And I joined a Canadian mining company to build a gold mine, and we never built it. And I discovered an amazing industry world with unbelievable specificities compared to the classical industry I was used to, and a specific field called sustainability in mining, or what we call also responsible mining. So why it is important, this responsible mining? Because after now 10 years of experience in West Africa, I am totally dedicated to my job, as mining companies have a huge opportunity to make significant differences around our site by sharing the benefits of our activities. 2 years ago, I joined Teranga Gold, a Canadian gold mining company created 10 years ago with an acquisition of a mine in Senegal. We had a strong growing strategy to becoming West African low-cost mid-tier gold producer. And we have now 2 operating mines, one in Senegal and one in Burkina Faso, 2 development projects in Burkina and Côte d'Ivoire, and exploration permits in the 3 jurisdictions where we operate. And we are recognized as responsible mining companies with strong values regarding ESG. Of course, we are constantly looking for ways to improve our ESG performance, and we have launched the implementation of the World Gold Council Responsible Gold Mining Principles last year. And we strongly believe that these principles reflect best practices in terms of ESG management in the gold industry, and that these principles will be an excellent guide for the gold mining industry for the future. Some news of the company. Recently, on November 16, we announced a combination with Endeavour to create a top 10 senior gold producer with an annual production of 1.5 million ounces. As part of my mandate at Teranga, of course, we developed the sustainability strategy across the company at any stages from exploration to closure, and we also implement ESG projects. As an example, we are currently implementing a livelihood restoration plan in Burkina Faso of $18 million over 6 years to mitigate the impact of a resettlement plan, but I can develop later on this project.
Excellent, thank you very much. Mark, let's turn over to you and maybe a couple of words about yourself and some of the ESG initiatives that are underway at B2 in Namibia.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Well, I'm the country manager and managing director for B2 Gold Namibia. We have a mine here called Ochikoto mine. It's about 400 kilometers north of the capital city of Windhoek, where I am right now. Just got back from the mine this afternoon. And I think that as far as B2 Gold is concerned, we're typical of the operations throughout the world. By saying that, I mean that for B2 Gold, making a difference, a sustainable difference to community, to country, to planet, is just part of who we are and what we do. And it's not a question of whether or not we would like to do that in order to gain a social license to operate in the countries in which we operate. It's really very much a function of who we are. And so I think, and I believe that in Namibia we've managed to step out and give back so much more than most other companies have. There are clearly a lot of responsible mining companies, and it really pleases me to see that in general, throughout my career, mining companies have moved towards concentrating on making a difference and ESG in general, whether it's social or environmental. And I think that as far as we're concerned, the impact that we've made in this country has been noticed. We have been recognized as being a great contributor to the country, not just in terms of the treasury, the royalties, taxes, export levies, and everything else that we paid as obligatory funding, but all the non-obligatory assistance that we're giving to the country has been recognized by literally everyone in the, let's say, all sectors of our communities. Sorts of things that we're doing, quite apart from our environmental impact, for which we're quite well known. We have a corporate social investment arm, which is really very much a focus area of mine right now, because the mine is operating extremely well, and I've stepped back from the day-to-day operations. And we have a number of pillars there, being education, environment and conservation. We look at social projects such as SME development, small to medium enterprise development, and in general, the fabric of our society. And we'd like to think that we spread our attention across each of the sectors of our social investment activities. Because of some of the projects we've done recently, we're probably better known for our environmental impact. Namibia is quite a pristine country as Canada is, and we regard the offset mechanisms that we have implemented as being an integral part of our operating philosophy. We are in the business of disturbing the environment as miners, especially open pit miners. We recognize that we can't ever put the environment back to the condition in which it was when we found it. So we've really emphasized the importance of offsets, and where those offsets can also support communities, indigenous communities in our case, so that the communities themselves will support the environment. I think that we've really honed that and made an example to others of how a mining company can actually get out there and support the communities that then support conservation and support the environment. So when we talk about environmental protection, you can't divorce the two. Social projects that uplift communities and environmental protection are one and the same thing. Yeah, I'll leave it at there for now. I'm sure there'll be other questions later that I can actually come into.
Thank you, Mark. Todd, let's turn to you now, and a couple of words on Cypher and some of the ESG initiatives you guys have got underway.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Andrew. Normally this stage of my introduction in a speech, I'd be thanking the organizers, Ryan or MSTA in this case, for getting me out of Winnipeg, because normally I'm on a stage somewhere else. So, I can't thank you for having me escape the cold weather today, guys. But you know what? It's going to be 6 degrees and sunny. So for anyone who knows Winnipeg in mid-December, that's like practically, shorts and t-shirt weather. So we're all happy around here today. So I think in a good mood. I'm in a good mood. Maybe that's why. Anyways, Andrew, thanks for the introduction. Cypher Environmental, we focus on road stabilization and dust control. So, really what we're doing for our mining clients is helping reduce their OPEX while simultaneously reducing their environmental footprint. So through the use of our technology, so dust control and road stabilization products. Haulage costs for open pit mines can be as much as 50% of operating costs. So when we actually really dig into what we can do to impact the road for our mining clients, we can save them a huge amount of money while reducing their environmental footprint. Now, if you talk about ESG, as a company, we're lucky because the use of our products implies ESG because of the fact that, we're reducing environmental, like I talked about, all the reducing the dust, reducing environmental impact, we're improving safety for people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, for us, it's kind of easy. So as we grew as a company, if you look at our story, we had 175% growth a couple of years ago. And really, as we start to grow and really, gain that success, I look at it personally as responsibility. It's our responsibility to actually give back. So it's all fine and dandy that we're solving environmental issues for our clients with our products, but we really wanted to, invest more in actually giving back and supporting our local community and the world as a whole, because we're a global company. We're based here in Winnipeg, Manitoba, the center of Canada, but our market is all over the world. And so we actually adopted a philosophy or a new tagline, actually, which is really a value statement. If you guys look at our website or anything, you're going to see always do what's right listed everywhere. So it really is a value statement. And so we've actually incorporated ESG and CSR. I sort of talk about them interchangeably. I get there's a difference, and I won't get into that right now. We've actually incorporated it into every sort of decision we make as a company. We donate a lot of money at the end of every year. We have some really cool projects. Our first one of this new program actually was with Baffinland, where they're a large, for people who aren't familiar with them, they're a large mine on Baffin Island in the very, very northern parts of Canada. It must be one of the most remote mines in the world. And anyways, so obviously they have a lot of community relations challenges because the indigenous population there is very tied to the community and to the environment. And so as a result of the contract we won there, we calculated quite a sizable chunk of that contract and actually donated it in the form of product to the community closest to the mine. And so as an example, it's just a really nice perpetual, we get great PR, the mine gets great PR. We're actually impacting the community. And so it's a perpetual great program. And so actually tomorrow, speaking of everyone doing a pivot because of COVID, we're doing our AGM with our distributors, and we're going to vote on the name for this new program. So any distributors that are listening in today, there's a little sneak peek of what we're going to be doing tomorrow. So, but anyways, but really, if you incorporate values at such a high level in the company, you get such massive buy-in from everyone, from all your stakeholders. So whether it be customers or whether it be your employees or your team members. So that's a huge thing for us. And really, at the end of the day, when values are at such, the core of every decision you make, it makes it so much easier to say yes or to say no. And therefore decisions become easier, and so do empowering your team members, because they all have bought into one sort of, guiding principle. So that's sort of a little brief synopsis, I guess, Andrew, what I had to say there. So look forward to sharing more, guys, throughout the next hour.
Excellent. Thank you, Todd. And so, Andrea, over to you to bring, I guess, the investor lens in this. And so a couple of words about national capital markets and how you guys are maybe, interfacing off with mining companies around this particular topic.
Yes, for sure. And maybe I'll just give a little background so people can understand. I have a bit of a probably different background than some of the other people on the panel. I started off way back when, actually, as a journalist. And in fact, speaking of Manitoba, my first job was at the Flin Flon Daily Reminder back in the day, where I was covering HBM&S, what's now Hudbay Mining. And that's where I really first learned about mining and the impact and the real value that it brings to communities. And after that, I spent a good decade working for the Financial Times of London in Latin America, where I spent a lot of time covering the mining sector, and in particular Canadian investments in mining in Latin America. When I returned to Canada, I spent several years at Kinross Gold, heading up their corporate communications, and really being the link between the investor relations function and the sustainability function. And what's interesting is when I was there, there was really a disconnect between investors who really cared about what the all-in sustaining cost was that quarter or, for the year. And, we communicated that as best we could. And then really on the corporate communications and PR side of it, the daily fights I was having really was around the sustainability issues. It was always managing the ESG, but investors at that time rarely cared about that. But when it came to the corporate reputation, that's where our challenges really lay in terms of how we were dealing with dust in a community where the mine was very close by, how we were dealing with arsenic, how we were dealing with tailings, that kind of thing. I moved over to national, and I head up the national public relations, and I head up a dedicated practice within the firm that focused on transactions and investor relations and corporate reputation writ large. And what we're seeing and what's important is we have several mining clients, and our goal really is to try and really consider, as ESG becomes ever more important, how we're layering that into at a very basic level, the disclosures that our clients make from an investor relations into the market. They're increasingly ESG, or there are material risks that need to be considered as part of their corporate disclosures. Increasingly, there's interest by investors writ large around what the company's doing from a sustainability perspective, and then corporate reputation at a higher level, and talking not so much about the specific metrics, but the intention of the company, what its commitments are. And these are becoming ever more important. Whereas, I would say back in the day when I was at Kinross, the sustainability function was kind of separate and apart from the rest of the company. And we would put out beautiful sustainability reports that nobody would read, and spend an immense amount of resource putting those out. These are increasingly becoming much more integrated into the overall communication that we're making to investors and to the market writ large, and to Canadians and the public. So I would say, really our job has been to continually look for ways to effectively communicate and disclose ESG for our clients.
Excellent, thank you, Andrea. So I want to go back and pick up on a couple of points that folks have raised, and this will drive, I guess, into some more discussion. So, I guess first by way of context, I mean, ESG, as you've all highlighted, is probably one of the biggest issues facing the mining industry today. Many of you, and I think many of the folks on the audience, probably read our Deloitte Tracking the Trends, which comes out every year in January. And this year, when we released it, probably our leading trend was ESG, and we called it the rise of the social investor. And when we release our report again in January, sort of spoiler alert, you're going to see a very sort of heavy focus on ESG again. And so we do believe that this is an issue that is here to stay, and I think is one that's really going to continue to shape the mining industry. And so, Gwennael, if I go back to you, you'd highlighted your sort of recent tie up with Endeavour, and how you are now moved Teranga into the bigger leagues of being a a significant gold mining company. And so as the company has gone through that particular tie up, do you feel that there's now a much greater spotlight on the organization around ESG? And how are you feeling some of that pressure?
Thanks for the question. In fact, I would say, especially I can talk about Teranga. I cannot talk about the future company, as we just started the integration process. But as part of Teranga, I would not call it a pressure, because I mean, that's what we do since many, many years on the ground. Just for a simple aspect, if we want to operate, we need to get the support of the stakeholders around us and to keep our social license. So at every stage of our activities, we need to take care of what we call sustainability, which is environment, governance, and social activities. So it's not a pressure, but what I can feel is the pressure not on the ground, but on the reporting line. And perhaps we'll talk later about the different standards of reporting on ESG, but this is really the challenge right now for mining companies, is to be able to report correctly on the expectation of the investors regarding ESG. But from a ground perspective, this is, I would say, normal activities. The only increasing pressure we see right now is the huge expectation for countries in terms of local content. So local jobs, local procurement, and your suppliers will be interested by that. But anything related to local businesses and local jobs, this is the main focus around our operations.
Okay, thank you. So, if we look at the landscape of funds today that are being attached to ESG principles, currently it's probably around a quarter. Some people even say about a third of the total invested capital base is attached to ESG. There's, FT released an article sometime over the summer where they estimated that probably within a 3 to 4 year period in Europe anyway, I think probably something like 57% of funds are going to be attached to ESG. And so I think different mining companies have faced pressure in different ways. Gwennael, I know you shied away from saying it, wasn't necessarily a pressure, but I certainly find that some mining companies do actually consider this to be, call it, increased scrutiny from investors around ESG and the requirements around that. So Mark, coming to you, you'd mentioned some of the some of the things that you guys were doing from B2 Gold's perspective, and how you were, making the right sort of community investors and creating those kind of local partnerships. When you look at ESG, the kinds of requirements that investors are looking for, range. There is absolutely the kinds of sustainability initiatives that you're referring to, but there's also initiatives around, decarbonization and being able to, show how companies are committing to sort of net zero type targets. There are potential requirements around, be it disclosures when it comes to areas like human rights, or being able to, ensure that things are being mined in a responsible way. Can you maybe talk about how you on the ground actually feel some of these kind of requirements or expectations on the part of investors?
Look, I think in my experience, and my experience is probably limited to the investment and analyst visits that we have normally after the mining in Dawe and Cape Town. They come up here and I spend a lot of time discussing various aspects with them. And there's absolutely no doubt that investors and analysts are very focused on whether or not you are the right sort of mining company that they want their investors to invest in. And they not only look at the technical aspects of your operations, the degree of expertise that you exhibit in terms of mining engineering, metallurgy, processing, whatever, but at least half of their questions revolve around, okay, so what are you doing to make a difference? I think it probably is a little bit more focused in the developing world. So in developing countries, investors would like to see that wherever they bring their money or their clients' money, the companies that they're investing in are actually very focused on uplifting the society, uplifting communities, and also doing something to prevent environmental degradation, to promote offsets, because as I just said a little earlier, mining is unfortunately part of the process of impacting on the environment. And so without a shadow of a doubt, there is a very strong emphasis on the triple bottom line. So it's not just the bottom line in terms of profitability. It's also people and planet. And whether or not that is one of the reasons that we do what we do in B2 Gold is largely irrelevant. I think that our shareholders and directors that have been very successful in the past have just made up their minds that if we're not going to be able to mine in a sustainable way and leave a lasting impact and a positive legacy long after we're shut down, then we're not going to bother mining in that country. In Namibia, we have a fairly large disparity between the haves and the have-nots. So the Gini coefficient is probably higher than it is anywhere else in the world. I think we're number one in the world. And that's because we have a very first world engineering stroke mining environment. We hardly have a manufacturing sector at all. And yet we have a very large sector of the population that are, I wouldn't use the word primitive because that's rather condescending, but let's say not as civilized as Westerners are. And so as such, in order to bring them into the fold, in order to make them part of the community, the large operators in the country, which are the primary industry operators, fishing, tourism, and mining, have to be committed to that sort of thing. We in Namibia think that we have been quite exemplary in terms of showing the world that if you can allow your communities to have ownership over the landscape, of the wildlife, over the environment, the pristine natural environment, they will look after it. If the government says that we are the owner, we look after it, you will do what we say, then wildlife will be poached, landscape will be degraded, nobody will look after it at all. And so we found that by supporting communities, we're actually supporting the environment. The whole value chain gets upgraded and supported through our intervention. And so if we look at our social license to operate, it's really not a question of doing what is expected of us. It's very much a question of of doing what is right and what really can make an impact. You mentioned a little earlier, Andrew, that it's not just about the communities and about the environment. It's about initiatives that are progressive. As an African country, so-called third world country, I think we're the first to have a fully autonomous hybrid solar plant that provides 50% of our power during the day. And there's, as I said, with a triple bottom line, there's a profit incentive there too. It's not only is it good for greenhouse gas emissions and reducing your impact on the environment, but it's simply good for the bottom line. So at the end of the day, the reason we have moved away from this concept of social responsibility. Responsibility implies that you've been told that you are responsible for these guys and those animals and the society and whatever it might be. We're saying that we want to invest in the countries in which we operate. We want to get something out of that investment. When we invest in the communities, indigenous, rural communities, for instance, we can support of our operation. When we invest in power, we can see that it's a lot cheaper for us to harness the sun. We have one of the best solar activities in the world here in Namibia. And so, it's not always altruistic. It's not always that we want to do something because we are philanthropists and we want to do good and we want to sleep well at night. There is no doubt that whatever you do benefits your business in manifold ways, whether it's because you create that investor confidence in the analyst investors that come visit us and say, wow, we want to invest in this company because they just really are broad-minded and forward-looking. And so obviously you get a benefit from that, or it's the cost benefit, or it's the ease of operations, or whatever it might be. So it's not just purely philanthropic. I've been spending a lot of my time, and my colleagues from MSTA know that, convincing everybody that if you do the right thing, the more you give, the more you get. What you give comes back manifold. And I've seen that in my career, especially with Beauty Gold, because as I said to you a little earlier, it's actually a requirement of our company to give back in that way. I hope I'm not kind of preaching converted. Everybody feels the same way. I realize that we're not special in the sense that we're doing everything very different, but there's one thing that I'm convinced of in our business, which is essentially in the extractive industry, which means that we're mining a non-renewable resource. We have to plow back. We've got to give back as much as we can, even beyond our life of mine. And so in our particular case, we have plans with our Greater Woodbird Partnership Park, this big national park we're creating, to provide an income to communities in the area. That'll continue long after we shut down, decades and decades, if not ad infinitum. And everything we're doing to gear towards that, such as the revenue from our solar plant that we're going to be exporting to the grid. Currently, we're an island producer, but we're linking to the grid. One of the main reasons for that is that post-mine closure, we'll be exporting that power, and the communities will benefit from that. So one has to look at the profitability of a mining company, the business model, the business plan that you come up with when you eventually decide to move ahead with a mine. And if you build the social impact, ESG element into that business plan from the word get-go, you'll find that it's not a cost, it's actually a benefit.
Agreed, Mark. I mean, I think increasingly what we see is, I think a lot of progressive mining companies, and I think this is the heart of what you're saying, is sort of looking beyond just the life of mine plans to kind of talk about life of community and say, all right, you've actually got to think about how the infrastructure that you put down now can actually have a meaningful long-term impact and drive broader economic development within those particular regions. So, Todd, I want to turn to you. And in your opening statements, you spoke quite a bit about some of the community investments that you guys are making at Cypher. I can also imagine that that Cypher is a great story for a mining company to have and to showcase what they're doing, particularly from a climate change and an energy perspective. I mean, over the years, you and I have had many discussions around your particular technology, and certainly I'm fairly familiar with it, such that you're running less water trucks to go and sort of stabilize your dirt roads. That's saving you energy. You are stabilizing the actual road itself. The haul trucks are probably getting a better grip and better traction, and so also using less fuel. And so there's a sort of an interesting story about how Cypher can help a company actually drive to some of their longer term climate change commitments. Are you seeing that sort of opportunity from a supplier perspective to be part of that story?
Yeah, well, I think telling the stories is critical, is tantamount to the success of everything. Mark and I know each other as well, and I've often thought Mark does a great story of really acting as does a great job of acting as an ambassador for B2Gold and for Namibia. The passion that he has for ESG and for giving back and for making a difference is evident when you hear him talk, and including the words he just shared with us now. And I think it's important for people like Mark to be vocal about this, because it's in the shared stories that we have, and like-minded people, similar to like-minded organizations, attract each other, right? So for Cypher, working with B2Gold is a natural fit, and vice versa. And Gwennael, we haven't met yet, but hopefully, we can introduce, Cypher and Teranga together. But the point is, yeah, I mean, and for us, we're multi-sectoral, so we're not just working in the mining sector. We're working in, forestry, oil and gas, ag. The common theme is though we can do the same things that we're doing in mining in all these other sectors that actually don't really talk a lot about ESG and CSR and really impacting the community the way mines do. And so, we were actually inspired by visiting B2Gold and actually understanding. So Mark, I don't know if you know about this, but we actually bought the rights to this recording afterwards. So you can't use this as me giving you guys a plug afterwards. So, but joking aside, so B2Gold's story actually inspired us. And in fact, I've another plug for you guys. I've got my gold bar sitting right here beside me. If anyone doesn't know that story, you should learn them. Google B2Gold Rhino gold bars. It's a really inspirational story. But yeah, we want to be a part of that. We want to be a part of the momentum, that's growing about ESG, and we want to encourage other people, other suppliers, because it's one thing for the mining companies to do it because, you talk about social license to operate and everything else. I mean, it's the sexy thing to talk about. Andrew, you talked about some people really feeling it might be, like they're being scrutinized. I think Mark had a great point about how much you give is how much you get back. And so for us, the use of our products implies ESG, but we want to take it, a big step beyond that. And so whatever we can do to really encourage other suppliers to look, sort of think outside the box a little bit as to how they can, because it's one thing to boast, well, I work with B2Gold and they do great things for the environment. And, so now I've got a feather in my cap, but really at the end of the day, what is your organization doing to grow that story that B2Gold is telling? I'm just focusing on B2Gold because Mark is sitting here and we're talking about B2Gold, but and Teranga and everybody else. And so I think conversation is really what's going to inspire, really and catalyze growth in this area for other people to really get the buy-in. And once you actually have buy-in, I mean, like Mark said, it's really just perpetual, continued sort of, funnel of just, good things happening. So, I mean, I know it sounds a little bit hokey and a little bit sort of cliche, but it's true. So
good. So before I come to you, Andrea, just a reminder to the audience that have joined us, if you do have any questions for the panel, please use the Q&A function that's on the webinar, and then we'll see those here on the back end. So Andrea, let's come back to you, and I'd be interested in you talking a bit about the kind of requirements that investors are looking for from mining companies. And in particular, do you think either mining companies or supplier companies are sufficiently prepared for those kinds of requirements, those kinds of questions that are coming from the investor community? Your comments.
I think it's interesting. I mean, we're in the middle of, I think, a pretty massive transition. And part of the challenge is that as probably everybody on this panel knows, is that there are a lot of different metrics out there and a lot of different ways to slice and dice the information. And because we're in this transition, it's still difficult. I mean, the big question out there is, how are we going to standardize, the metrics so that investors can really make judgments based on a clear set of metrics that are comparable across companies and sectors? And that's part of the challenge that I think everybody is grappling with right now, because there's a lot of different information out there that makes it difficult to be able to take a really holistic look at things. And I think, in addition to that, there's the question of, have the metrics that you've provided, have they been audited in some way? Is there a credit rating attached to this? In other words, we're starting to see the evolution of actual, what would be the equivalent of a credit rating, but for ESG. So we're all very socialized to having a rating from S&P or from Moody's about your investment grade. But having a true understanding of what that means for ESG, this is going to become more commonplace and is going to help Sustainalytics, I should say, recently made their ratings public. So taking it out of the black box so that companies can see and investors have a better sense. So, as this becomes more normalized, I think it's going to get easier. I think a lot of companies still don't know what necessarily they should be reporting and how. So I think we're going to continue to see an evolution. My take is that the institutional investors are leading the charge here, and they're the ones who are, it was of course triggered, or I shouldn't even say triggered, but BlackRock obviously made the biggest splash when their CEO Larry Fink basically said we're going to be making our investments through a sustainability lens. But they and many other institutional investors are getting a lot more sophisticated about what they're looking for, the variety of metrics they're going to be looking at from across the board, from the GRI and others. So trying to navigate that is going to be difficult for companies. And in addition to that, I think they're also going to need to consider, retail investors for the smaller companies. One thing is the big super major miners that, get institutional investment and have an easier time with instituting sophisticated ESG metrics. But when you get into the mid-tier and lower, smaller companies, this becomes ever more challenging. And then you're grappling with retail investors. And what's going to be particularly challenging, I think, for the mining sector is attracting millennial investors who, my father had no problem investing in mining. He grew up in Canada. It was part of the culture. Everybody invested in mining companies. But what about millennials and how they think about investing and the generations that come after? There's a natural reticence to invest in the sector. And so there's going to be, companies really have to be on the edge of, we keep talking about telling the story. And we know that mining, and having worked in the sector, always complains about how our story doesn't get out. We complain about it a lot, but it doesn't change. And that's going to have to be really, in my view, very critical, is how do we change the story and really tell the story? Because we know, unlike fossil fuels, that mining is critical to a low carbon future. But for some reason, that's still, I don't know how really well socialized that is. And when we look at the ESG ratings and metrics, the sector is still considered high risk. There's a way around that, but a lot of work to be done still.
Agreed, Andrea. And it's, it's interesting. Earlier in the year, I think it was in July, the World Economic Forum released a report, and they identified trust deficit as being probably one of the number one risk, as reported by the mining industry, that they would face going forward. And I think this trust deficit has got many different angles to it, right? It's a trust deficit with investors. There's a trust deficit in some parts of the world with communities and host governments, and also with society at large. But yet the industry is so critical to supplying the minerals that are going to drive this lower carbon future that we're all heading down, right? And so the industry is critical, but it needs to find a way to kind of regain a lot of that trust. So there are a lot of interesting questions coming in here from the audience, and so I'm going to throw some of these out here. And maybe this first one I'll point to you, Andrea, which is, there seems to be no consistency to measure ESG. Who should be standardizing these measures, industry or investors?
Well, ideally, it should be a combination of both. You know, I actually moderated a panel not that long ago, and one of the key points that we talked about was exactly this, because the concern is that these metrics are being developed from, you know, a little bit from 30,000 feet, from folks who aren't on the ground, who may not fully understand all the considerations that go into mining, which is an incredibly complex industry. And the concern the industry has is that those metrics may not have a relation to reality on the ground and truly getting to a place, as B2B mentioned, where you have a triple bottom line, where it needs to make, always needs to make sense from a profitability point of view in order for it to be sustainable. You can have the best intentions and be out of business. So, you know, I would argue that there needs to be far greater collaboration from these, you know, meta organizations that are developing these metrics and the industry itself in order to develop, you know, a certain amount of standardized metrics that really realistically make sense, are achievable. One of the more interesting things, you know, pointed out to me by an institutional investor not that long ago was, you know, we don't want to see pretty sustainability reports and, you know, where you highlight one mine that's doing great things. We want to understand truly what your situation is on the ground, and be able to show measurable progress in achieving a target. And in order to do that, I really think it means there needs to be that greater collaboration on both sides. Great.
So next question here, and I'll point this one to Gwennael and to Mark to answer. So the question here is that, on the one hand, the expectation of mining companies is to mine and to generate wealth. On the other hand, there also seems to be this requirement to do good and kind of create you know, impact in the community. Can you do both, and can you do that in a win-win way for both sides, or are these mutually exclusive objectives? So maybe Gwennael, why don't you lead off with your thoughts?
Yes, sure. Thanks, Andrew. Yes, I strongly believe it's a win-win, in fact, because if we can develop support, especially I'm talking with my experience in development country in Africa, but if we can develop support the countries in terms of impacting positively the economy, support the communities with developing the capacities, I am convinced that it will be a win for our main job, which is to mine. Because, I mean, facing an issue with your key stakeholders can result with a huge consequence in terms of stoppage of work or that kind of things. So it's really a win-win, and at the end, it is not costly to invest in ESG. And another point that was mentioned by Mark as well, the key points for the future of mining activities is to prepare closure and make sure that it will not be a disaster when we will leave, but that we will leave a wealthy economy around us, and that the investment we've done can continue. So definitively, it's a win-win.
Great. Mark? Mark, you're on mute.
Apologies. I completely agree with what Gwennael said, as well as Andrea. It's very difficult to come up with goals and targets, and I read one of the questions that was posed by our audience there in terms of being prescriptive as far as what you're expected to do in giving back. Now, I have the benefit in my own personal experience of having worked for an industrial minerals company, Solvay. It's a very big multinational company. And none of the industrial minerals are very profitable in terms of the mining phase of the industrial minerals. They're normally linked upstream to the final processing plants, whether it's minerals like fluorspar, apatite, feldspar, celestite, whatever it might be. The mining phase is not profitable at all. And yet I was with a progressive company that was able to dedicate a certain percentage of its revenue as opposed to profit. Even in times when, as a result of the cyclic nature of metals and minerals, especially industrial minerals, especially with the Asian countries dominating the industrial minerals sector, for some years we weren't making a profit at all, and yet our social investment programs continued as if it was part of doing business. You didn't have any choice about it. It was one of those cost items in your income statement that you had to accept. It's a fixed cost, and you go ahead with it. So I'm in favor of the view that if you're going to invest in a mine, you build that into your business model, especially in the developing world. If you invest in Canada, obviously in parts of Canada, you have the indigenous communities that need to be supported as well, but other parts of the first world, whether it's mining in Finland, where we had a mine, we had a project we intended to create a mine out of, you've got to view it differently. So being prescriptive about what percentage of profit or revenue you put into CSI or CSR, whatever you want to call it, I think is the wrong way. But there is a balance there. If you don't enter into a project having written up the commitment to making a lasting difference and a sustainable legacy for yourselves as a company, then you should rather walk away from the project because it's just not worth it. I do believe that mining by nature has had a bad reputation in the past. I can look myself in the mirror every day in the morning, usually get a fright. But when I look myself in the mirror and I think about what I do as a miner, I'm actually really proud of it. I can honestly say that I make a positive, lasting difference on behalf of my organization. I don't want to work for a company that doesn't do that. I don't want to work for a company that focuses on just the single P, which is profit. I'd like to end by saying that one of the gurus in terms of corporate governance, a guy by the name of Professor Mervyn King, you probably heard of the King Codes. King 4 is very much implemented throughout the world. And I sat with Mervyn King for dinner one evening, and he said to me, Mark, I did a study before I started with King 1, the first King Code. And I wanted to establish what it was about the companies that are fabulously successful continuously, right? Not the companies that actually reach their peak, their epitome, and then slowly but surely lose their profitability and collapse after 10 years or so. But there are companies that have been around for 100 years. CNN has recently featured some of these 100-year companies and that are fabulously successful continuously. The one common denominator of every single one of them, the overarching common denominator has been the fact that they give back beyond measure. Right? They give back to the communities, they give back to society, they give back to the environment. And it's almost as if there's an unwritten law of the universe that we don't quite understand that dictates that if you do that, you will be successful. Obviously, given that you have to have a good business model and a business plan, and you've got to have good people working for you, and a good deposit as far as money is concerned. But the absence of that has shown that the companies do not last. They're successful for a while, and then they fall from favor within the communities and the country in which they operate, and they become unacceptable and they shut down. And so Mervyn King has taught us that it really is the triple bottom line that I spoke of and Andrea mentioned a little earlier, that we need to focus on. And for those companies that are listening in, that are considering, and one of the questions I saw in the Q&A here, considering why it would be necessary to invest if you've got a marginal deposit and it's really important for you to be able to make a profit for your investors, and clearly it is, then, you know, if that component does not allow you to start the mine and get the business model working, then rather walk away from it and look for a different deposit, right?
Great, thank you, Mark. I think we've got probably time for one more question. I'm going to combine two of these questions and pose it to you, Todd. So the questions here are, first of all, will suppliers be asked by their clients more about what they're doing from an ESG perspective? And then I guess the second part of that question, if you are a small supplier, if you are a small, you know, an SME in this particular field, you know, that just feels like a really big topic for a small company to tackle. And so how do you go about that? Your comments.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, I mean, I would pose sort of the challenge to the mining companies that are present in the conversation today, that I think that, like, I would like to see on tenders, for example, if we're filling out a tender, what do you do about ESG? Or what do you, I mean, I don't think that we even come across that. So there is no way for us to do it other than when we have guys that for us, you know, technical support is, you know, is a pillar to our success, which means actually sending people, you know, from Canada across the world to train people on the use of our technologies. And so, you know, they are on the ground talking with our mining clients about it, but that's usually after the fact. We've already won the contract, or at least got a trial or a demonstration or something set up. So they've already sort of bought into at least the idea of using our technology. But in terms of how do you actually convey that to the mines or to the operators, to your customers, beyond actually, you know, physically telling them and being in front of their face, is just, I mean, I think you have to be bold. Our website, everything, all of our sort of outwardly facing material is about to be changed, and we're going to be bold about, you know, right now sort of says, oh, we do ESG and we do this for the environment, and we're going to start yelling it on our website. It's going to be in bold, you know, capital bold letters with exclamation marks, and we're going to start to really, because it's something to be proud of. It's something that if you are doing it, you guys need to be speaking up, and it draws exactly back to the point I talked about earlier about Mark being such a great ambassador for ESG and talking about it, inspiring others to do it. And so that's what you have to do as a supplier. I mean, if you want you know, a mining company or a customer in whatever industry they are to see it, to understand what you're doing and to understand the metrics of your ESG, whether you have KPIs you're attaining or not, but say it. Put it on your website, be bold about it, put it on your business card. You know, should be in all your brochures, so they actually notice. Because when push comes to shove, when it's actually you filling out a tender or something like that, there may not be an opportunity for you to actually share that story. So I encourage everyone to talk about it as much as they can. And that's, you know, for what it's worth, I think it's the best way to really get that message out there. And it works both ways for the mining companies and for the suppliers.
Thank you, Todd. So Ryan, I want to bring you back in to sort of close us off here. But before I hand over to you, just wanted to thank the panelists very much for the time and for this really interesting conversation, and of course also to the audience for their questions. So over to you, Ryan.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And again, yeah, thanks panelists and for everyone watching. You know, it shows to you where we do, as much as many of the panelists have living and been breathing this kind of world for a while, it still seems to be kind of new territory as we go through hearing about, you know, what is it that we're really measuring, and does it really matter in terms of it's what we do on the ground and how transparent that is to everybody understanding that. And to hear what you know, Todd from a small medium-sized enterprise incorporating this language into their part. And it also speaks to me that if you're very clear, I've heard this term, but if you're very clear on the why you exist, it makes it very easy for everyone to understand what they're doing and how they're doing it in those organizations. So and you attract talent that is like-minded, if you will. So I'll end it with that. I really appreciate everybody taking the time again on the panelists, sharing their expertise. It was very interesting to hear. We have recorded it too, so we'll be able to kind of keep this messaging and this dialogue going in the future. So again, thanks everyone for attending, And thanks for our panelists. And thank you, Andrew, for doing a great job moderating.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Take
Thanks
care.
so much.
You guys.